Hello, it's Laurie, your BlockchainBrad, and today we're getting serious with all things Fusion. That's right, they're injecting something quite unique into the blockchain space when it comes to DeFi and finance protocols, and we have the CPO here, the Chief Product Officer. His name is John Liu. Thank you very much for your time, mate.
Yes, nice to meet you, Brad, and hello, everybody. I know the CPO is always a struggle. Some people think it's C3PO.
Right, and certainly your role is important, and we're going to find out what exactly you do in a moment. But before we start, John, I wanted to firstly thank you for this opportunity to do a free interview with you. The objective is to be transparent and to try and provide more information as with education as the focus and premise. Now, you are all about a non-profit foundation and also a very fundamental protocol itself. Established for decentralized global finance. Can you tell us a bit more about those terms and what you stand for at Fusion?
Yeah, so Fusion is a non-profit, and it's a layer 1 protocol, as you mentioned. Now, you mentioned that also it is focused on DeFi, and for our view on DeFi is really down to two things, right? Number one, with DeFi, we believe that interoperability of assets is quite important. And by interoperability, it's a fancy term of just saying assets need to talk to each other in order to have value exchange. And the other thing we think is very important is easy time value digitization. So everybody knows about asset digitization, but do they know about time value as much? And what is time value? Is the value of your asset over the length of time. And we know it today as far as renting a house, loaning an auto, all of those are just taking different slices of time from that asset. And we believe it's fundamental to digitization. So that's the two things that Fusion's focused on.
And it's interesting because there's certain fundamental theory that aligns with that, as you would know, and temporality sees to be a fundamental asset when it comes to trying inculcating trust in assets, especially in this new environment of trustless technologies. But moving back to you, I wanted to ask you about the nature of your protocol as well, in terms of being open source, being an accessible technology. Now, how for the people are you, given that you're non-profit?
Sure, that's an interesting question. The fact that we're non-profit means, I suppose, we're always for the people, right? So, you know, if mainnet is launched, and then you can go to our GitHub and you can see all the time lock libraries out there. In fact, it's quite fun. From the community side, you know, they're all open source and they're gung-ho on building with us, but they always say, why are we giving away such technology for free, right? You know, aren't we scared that other people are going to take our technology? Of course, that's always a risk, right? So that's why you have these type of, I think, like the Stanford type of licenses, but we do encourage innovation in the industry because we think, you know, only by working on this thing together can we actually move this industry forward.
Right, it's an interesting point. And as you would appreciate, right now, DeFi is the buzzword in crypto and blockchain environments. What's your viewpoint on DeFi as a slogan and as a point of value for both now and the future?
Yeah, I think DeFi has a very sexy appeal to it. You know, everybody likes that idea. Man, I love to exchange with someone else. I love to be in charge of my own finance. You know, that's a very powerful statement to have. But not every aspect of finance is actually ready for it. Not everyone really wants that responsibility. You know, when I say to you, okay, you can exchange with someone else, but you're also fully responsible for your asset. If you happen to lose this piece of paper where you wrote your password on, guess what? You just lost all your assets. I think people take a step back and they go, man, that's kind of scary. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. So there's definitely areas where decentralized finance makes a lot of sense. You cut out a lot of the middlemen in there who are taking too many fees. For example, in licensing for creative content and media, songs, for example, like 70% to 80% of the revenue that's generated just gets sucked away from middlemen. And we don't need that much inefficiency. But in other areas where if I'm actually lending money out to you, I'd like to trust, Brad, that you're not going to default on me and you know, walk away with all my money. So
Exactly.
there's a balance that must be had, I think, in this DeFi world.
And in that context, I want to ask you, given that you have been in the space and you certainly know it well, what are your thoughts on the readiness of DeFi right now, especially considering that we're still at the phase of experimentation of layer ones, you know, and even layer zero to some extent, to make sure that we have the bedrock, we have that foundation for the mass adoption that technically should be coming, should this play out as we envisage it?
Yeah. So that's a packed question because there's a lot of readiness layers that we can look at. Is it ready from the innovation technology side? Is it ready from a ecosystem trust side? Is it ready from a regulation side? And I'll take a stab at trying to answer all three of those, right?
Okay.
On the technology side, I do think we're just very early on in the adoption cycle. So everybody's innovating. We have a lot of tools as far as being able to exchange, being able to track value. That's well proven by this point. Bitcoin's been around long enough, and we have all these coins out there that have shown that you can actually exchange values, right, seamlessly within a blockchain and in certain cases across blockchains. So that's good news. You have also these other experimental technologies like zero knowledge type of identities, selective privacy. And that's a harder sell because I don't think we're quite ready for that type of innovation, right? I think down the line, we definitely need something. I only want to expose certain information. In the truly DeFi world, I only want to expose that I'm over 18, but I don't want to expose my exact age. That's great. But that's like a second order derivative of advancement that we're not quite ready for yet. So that's what I think from a technology standpoint where we're at. We're just kind of like getting down. Let's make sure we can get our value exchange down. We can make sure our transactions are looking good. Make sure our processing speed is all good. Let's get that all set. So from the ecosystem perspective, we're starting to integrate the various pieces that are needed for value exchange. Something like a Fusion protocol where I say I'm digitizing assets versus someone else who's also digitizing assets. What's the difference? Well, with Fusion, you can, digitize with time value and kind of innovate a little more with that asset that you've actually digitized. You don't just have a token that you can buy and sell. You can control how long you want to buy and sell that token for. So we're starting to integrate everybody's different views into one ecosystem. And we're also, through people like Morpheus, through also our own partnerships, lining up all the different players that are involved in a end-to-end financial flow, right? So from the people who are originating assets to the technology enablers to the kind of interface to the consumers, such as an asset issuance platform.
That's a really interesting point too, because it's almost like you're creating internet of value when it comes to alignment of parties that are also trying to build for real adoption, real use case, real business. And we'll certainly talk about some of those partnerships later in the interview. But I wanted to also ask you a bit about you in terms of your experience, what you've done in the past, because as you are the Chief Product Officer, clearly there's certain skill sets you need to really lead this out. So what makes you suited for this job, and how's everything going, based on your skill sets?
So if you look at my skill set, it seems like it's all over the place, but 19 years I've worked in Wall Street. Now, half of that time I've actually worked trading assets, like in bonds and derivatives, right? In the very center of inefficiencies that we're trying to solve today. Trading bonds over the phone, on chat, actually writing down my trades on a notebook. All the people are still laughing at me, but that's kind of my background. Whenever I did a trade, I wrote it down on a notebook. My trade assistant would then enter it into the spreadsheet. Right?
So old school trader.
Old school trader, right? And actually across all different assets as well. So bonds, I traded derivatives, futures, options, the whole gamut. Now, the other 9 years, I've been building product solutions, trying to solve all the inefficiencies that I saw, right? And this spans analytics, it spanned also operations, and it also had like entitlements. So it's building out platforms that entitle content. I mean, that's what I've been doing for the remaining 9 years of my life. And it makes me very well suited for something like a blockchain for two reasons. Number one, because of the financial background that I have, bringing all the Wall Street acumen. And number two, my experience in building out platforms in a kind of hard or kind of not well-defined area, like regulations aren't quite well-defined yet, the players aren't quite well-defined yet. That's a lot of work to try to build a product out, and I've had quite a bit of experience doing that.
Well, it's good to know, and also given that you have that finance acumen and that experience, that's going to be fundamental because you're a finance-centric protocol. But I also wanted to just touch on trading and speculation for a moment, because obviously you've seen the dark side of crypto as well. It certainly has existed, and it's certainly not going away anytime soon in terms of the rife speculation, that gamble approach to, shorting everything and trying to just make, stack sats and essentially stack fiat as well. What are your thoughts on that kind of approach when essentially many of us are trying to promote the long-term vision and value of this industry?
Yeah. And that kind of touches on a third point that I was mentioning before, like the regulation aspect, right? Nobody likes to have Big Brother there, but they do exist in some places to protect everyone, to get rid of the Wild West aspect of things. There are a lot of scammy situations that are happening, even legit companies. I mean, that's unfortunately just been the way it is. And the good news is the regulators, the government agencies are starting to come down and go after these type of scammers. With Fusion, of course, we've been very close to cyber criminals ourselves, unfortunately.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that later.
I knew it was going to come up. But that's the nature of the industry, right? You're dealing with tech-savvy people, and who are also of not always the best nature, right? Of course, they're going to be out there trying to, when there's this much wealth being generated in the system, of course, they're going to be out there trying to get it. So the good news I see is we're kind of moving past that Wild West stage and making a safer area for the mass adoption to happen. Right.
So hence DeFi, is the next sort of expectation in terms of value proposition. Are you bullish on the wider frame of DeFi, especially given that you are a finance-based protocol?
Absolutely, I am. And DeFi definitely has its place. If it's whether it's something like I have to pay 7%, for example, just to do my FX, my foreign exchange, when I went from US to Spain, for example, I don't need to pay away that many fees just to do an FX transaction, right? There's something that much cheaply done just from the stable coins if I can find my counterparty against it. Lending on if it's in a protected and KYC AML, we have to go through those regulations just so we don't have this type of, these kind of scammy situations. But in the sense where I can lend money out and let's say earn a 6% interest as opposed to lend my money out and pay 6% away to a bank who then, eats all that money just because they lined up the counterparty, I think there's definitely a very bullish future.
It's really interesting you say that, especially since, from the outset we heard that libertarian, and we still hear those libertarian ideals being promoted and I guess explained by certain parties, those that are the real proponents of the cypherpunk movement. Given that you are so pro KYC AML, what do you say to those who are pro privacy and want to circumvent those kinds of measures?
I think just like regulation needs to exist in the right place. You don't want to over-regulate where you don't need to over-regulate, and you want to regulate where there's not enough regulation. I know that feels kind of like one of those great answers, but it's the reality of things, right? In the case where, FATFA, they came out, FinCEN and SEC, they all came out with a joint statement just recently, but just firming out where they think KYC and AML is necessary. And I think that does bring a level of professionalism or maturity to the blockchain industry, right? It's no longer going to be associated with the dark transactions. That's always going to happen. It happens right now with fiat currencies too. I go out and there's the mob agency collecting money.
Happens on Wall Street. Happens with fiat. Happens everywhere.
It happens everywhere. But the regulations do help to kind of limit the damage out, right? So we do need some type of protection for the consumer. Now, where there is a case, as the digital world builds out, sure, there's a utopia out there that I can see where it's like the world is no longer defined by the physical boundaries, a country of US and Australia or something like that. These are digital boundaries that are going to be built out. I mean, that's an exciting utopia that we can all dream about. I don't know if we're going to get there in my lifetime, but we're definitely building the tools to make that happen.
Got it. And it's interesting to see different perspectives, come forth. And we certainly see a lot of discussion right now about different camps and different sort of ideologies, when it comes to crypto, especially when it comes to Bitcoin. But moving on to you for a moment, with regard to devs and development, I wanted to discuss some of the initiatives that you've created with your team to make sure that you are pro dev and you're really supporting them as you, continue to build this ecosystem and this protocol.
Yep. Yeah, so we launched our mainnet back in June, and since then we're now going into the high gear of adoption, right? And before we go into adoption, you pretty much need the firepower. We've got our dev within Fusion. They've been working on a protocol team for some time, but now we're turning on the pumps and reaching out to our community to bring developers into our chain. And as you mentioned, we've got different campaigns that we've launched. I think we've just announced it 2 or 3 days ago, where we're offering time value awards within Fusion tokens to find proper developers with good talents. Maybe you're going to be back-end engineer, maybe you're a product manager, maybe you're front-end engineer, and we're lining up the roster, right? Because we have a lot of exciting products to build out there. And you're going to see more incentives be announced in the next 2 to 3 months, especially as our DCRM technology, which is our decentralized interoperability solution, starts going into beta by the end of this year.
Right. Okay. So in that sense, you're trying to incentivize real work, those that essentially can do things to bolster the real value of your eco, not just the protocol, but now expand into applications. With the crypto campaigns, one of the things I read was you have a 2 million FSN, that's your token sort of initiative. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, they all fall into this time valued type of initiative that we said, right? So 2 million FSN, if you, let's say, are a proper developer, you've got the proper CV, we validate that you've got your GitHub and everything, then of course you will earn a certain type of reward for actually registering as a Fusion developer. Then that's just step one. Then this next step is, now that we've actually lined up the full roster, we're going to start awarding out those particular incentives into, let's say, building out a DEX. That's where we already have a DEX, but we want to take it to the next level, actually building out a nice UI DEX that goes with us. So who do we need in there? Well, we'll open it up. Maybe it's a team that we actually put together with the community. I'm very excited. Just 2 days ago, it's quite funny because we're seeing the community come alive, right? We've added 60 developers just in a matter of 2 or 3 days. But I was talking to one of the community developers, and he was all ready to go on humanitarian type of fundraising, and it's just great seeing so many capable developers joining our community.
Well, that's good to hear, because obviously, we want those parties in any, viable startup that are long-term focused, because that short-term gain, it really doesn't do a lot for the teams trying to establish something for the future, whether they be for-profit or non-profit in your case. Yeah. Now, in terms of other strategies with business building and those business campaigns, what are you doing on that front to really, garner more support in that mainstream sector?
Yeah, it's been, so you've seen a lot of the partnerships that we've announced, and then from May until August, I was hitting the floor really hard, talking to all the different partnerships, and both through the traditional Wall Street type of connections that I've had with the big banks, as well as a lot of the innovative companies that I've met through the various conferences I've been to. Now, what I've noticed is the big banks, because they're heavily regulated, they have to be very, very careful with who they engage with, and they're also very selective, of course, and they move very slowly, right? So that's the good news. We continue discussions over them. We continue to educate them. Education, as I'm sure you're aware, and Morpheus Labs, of course, is a big part of adapting to new technologies.
Absolutely.
But
so essentially, they're open for discussion, not necessarily open for business today. But as you mentioned before, interesting points on time in terms of a value prop, but it's also essential criterion for these parties to just make that switch.
Yeah, and part of it's regulation based as well. I was talking to one of the tier 1 banks. Can't give out the name, of course, but they love the technology that we're building. Unfortunately, I will not, but they're very interested in our technology. We spent about 2 or 3 sessions, but they also asked this question at the end. They said, "Do you have a token?" Well, yes, we're a foundation. Of course, we have our own token. And they said, "Well, unfortunately, until we get more clarity from the SEC on exactly what's happening on the utility tokens for security, and we just can't work with any project that has a token."
John, right? I have to stop you and say thank you for saying that. I speak to a lot of team members in a lot of startups. None are really that clear. And it's great to hear that clarity for us, us as listeners trying to understand each of these startups, because the reality is that the token does really put off a lot of these regulators and a lot of these startup entities who do want to engage with blockchain. And the terminological challenge is real. It doesn't necessarily mean that the token's invalid. It just means that there's a terminological anomaly right now. We're still trying to work out what each of these mean from the top, echelons of business and government, so we can start to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, even from a balance sheet standpoint, how do you classify a token? Where does it fit? Is it an equity? Those are very real questions that businesses don't know how to handle right now. And it's just not worth the headache, right?
Right. And what are your thoughts on the scenario that plays out where we've seen things like ICOs, in that era, and then we saw the IEOs and we move forward in the sense of the buzzword right from the outset was utility token, but initially often they function as pre-utility, as I like to say, or some have deemed them quasi-securities, which is fair, but they tend to morph. Ethereum's a perfect example into a supported, SEC supported commodity. So again, there's evidence of flexibility from parties like the SEC to change their determination when it comes to the terminology and what they actually are as assets. So are you also, looking forward to seeing these muddy waters be cleared up so that we can have a better understanding of what all these assets are actually classified as?
Absolutely. I think the whole industry is looking forward to these kind of the clarity coming from the regulators. And I was in one of those smaller meetups probably like 2 months ago, and the topic of whether you want to work with the regulators or you want to run away from them came up. And I was surprised. To me, I was like, look, it's pretty clear. No one wants to talk to the regulators, but they're reaching out for help, right? Of course, if you did something that's not good, they're going to come after you. They might want to slap you on the hand because, their goal is not to destroy you, but they do have to make sure you don't do it again. It's better that you actually work with them, explain to them your standpoint, and then have this dialogue open, as opposed to, we're just going to circumvent the regulations completely, and because they don't know what they're doing.
Right, and it's interesting you talked about slap on the wrist, because that's really what has been happening. It hasn't been an iron fist or an iron hammer that's been wielded down. It's just been a message, to those parties that perhaps, weren't forthright from the outset with their disclosures of what they actually functioned as. And now we see the repercussions with fines come out, but they've been very light. So it's clear that the directions moving forward are trying to group these assets into clear camps, so that once again we can have, as consumers more globally, confidence that this ecosystem is real and it's here for the long term. And until then, it's a little bit of a sort of a nebulous, cloudy space.
It is, and then we always take. I'm always happy when I see the headlines like central banks continue to explore with digital currencies. I think it's up to like 15 of them now. They're exploring with these central bank digital currencies, and it's going to take time, right? It's going to take, maybe it's a year away or anything like that. But the fact is, they're actually starting to look at it. It's no longer like, oh, this thing's not here. This whole digital currency is a joke. When this many central banks are actually talking about it and experimenting, building prototypes with it, that's a very positive sign for the future of both digital currency as well as DeFi.
I totally agree. And then on top of that, when you see the G7 sort of initiatives, that really sends a strong message. When we see reactions to Libra, for example, another very, important message for the crypto world, and they're taking these things very seriously. So with regard to you, I wanted to talk to you a bit more about your mainstream business in terms of some of those names of those partnerships, really building on the traction that you've built from the outset and showcasing what you really do in terms of real use.
Yep. I think the best partnerships that I have, of course I'm biased because I come from a bond background, so the ones that I'm most excited always are my bond type of partnerships. So AXP and Yacht Capital. AXP we announced early this year, around February, and Yacht we announced just about a month ago. Both of them are actually issuing debt in assets that the traditional consumer hasn't had access to, and actually return quite well returns of like 8% plus. Now, when you think about crypto, you're like, oh, that's nothing, right? That's like, I'm used to like 20 or 30% returns. But when you think about bonds, an 8% return in a world where in Europe, for example, you're dealing with negative interest rates, that's a very good type of return. And so both these partners are innovating in the space. They're reaching out to consumers who need to borrow money, who've been shut down because the big banks don't want to service this particular niche, right? They're just like, this isn't a big enough business for the banks to deal with. It's not worth their balance sheet risk. So they're solving it from the people who need to borrow money, and they're lining up digital investors on the other side, people who want to put money to work. Right? If I go to Europe and I say, I got 8% to 10% interest for you with very low default rates of under 2%. So under 2% of the entire, under 2% of the entire basket of securities. Not that all 2%, 2% of these companies are going to default. It's an entire basket that we're bringing over, right? That's a really attractive offering that most consumers just aren't even aware of.
And what could this mean also,
doing,
John? Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask you on that front, what could it mean for millennials who typically struggle to get support in these areas, whether that be from lending, whether that be from bonds, whether that be from any sort of financial assets? Many of them need very significant assets in hand, or evidence of income, for example. So what could this mean in terms of change?
It's not just for millennials. I like to put them into the classification of the underbanked and the unbanked, right? It's broader than that. Some of these guys, it's because they don't have a credit history. Whether you're a millennial or small business, how are you supposed to put in like 3-4 years of work paychecks or merchant returns? You just don't have that much information, right? The good news is, with other ingredients, maybe it is like this kind of AI where, like with Alibaba, where they look at all non-alternative data sources to actually decide whether they want to give you a loan, as opposed to the traditional way of showing up with 3-4 years of credit history. Blockchain with digital securities and AI, where you can kind of piece it all together, we're opening up new return avenues for people that we were just talking about, the underbanked.
Well, that's certainly exciting to see, because that's the whole point of what many people started with, is trying to create a more equitable system, enable people to have more autonomy and have more of a voice, and certainly to have more of an input as well, and enable them to have full control of their assets as well and their finances. Now, in terms of a blockchain business, we've talked about the DeFi, earlier on. The interoperability, in the beginning when we saw crypto unfold, a lot of those words like interoperability were excessively used. I think we can all fairly say that. So do you feel that there's more veracity in the term now? There's more meaning and meat in it, given that the interconnective value is definitely there to expand upon the silos that protocols can be?
Yeah, I think interoperability, everybody is one of those problems where people like to kick the can down the road. They're like, man, interoperability is important. Of course, we should be talking to our other blockchain systems. The reality of the industry right now, if I'm going to be frank, is everybody's feeling the pressure to kind of prove the use case on their own chains. They raised a bunch of money. They're feeling pressure. I got to validate my use cases. So they're doing a great job of that. They're creating it within their own little island, right? So we've got these great islands of value that are being created out there. But as you know, this internet of value that we're always looking for is this connected world. So we got to build the bridges that connect those islands through. And I'm happy that there are a few projects, us included, but of course Cosmos gets mentioned, Polkadot, right? They're all taking interoperability as a proactive step. I like to coin the term that the research, consensus research use, which is proactive interoperability. We're thinking of addressing it first, as opposed to doing it as an afterthought, right? So we're going to help. On the one hand, we're not like a commercial, well, here's your commercial business. There's not like a wallet that's generating revenue, which is what a lot of blockchain companies are focused on, for example. We're actually we're solving the problem of the industry that you guys are going to pay the pain for if we don't address now.
And it's interesting because, you mentioned some of those names. We see the likes of Unibright trying to do that in Europe, and obviously for their global startup. We see Quant doing that with their Overledger system, trying to essentially interconnect business via their own software. And OneLedger is another example. I mean, I'm not naming these names to FOMO, but there is a push now for trying to create these interoperables, as we call it. Now, one I really wanted to talk about was one that I'm an ambassador for, so it's important that I do disclose that. That is a paid role. That is Morpheus Labs, or Morpheus as many people know them. Now, they are doing their BPaaS, their blockchain platform as a service. They're really trying to now to seriously build out the potentials of this in this nascent time. So my understanding is that you are working with them, that you really understand their technology. Can you talk to us a bit more about the value of enterprise and the value of this, cross-protocol and cross-platform partnership?
Yeah. So when I met Morpheus Lab, the CEO of Morpheus Lab, I think he mentioned two things that got me quite excited. Number one, he was building out, as you said, an enterprise kind of platform where developers come in and they can just pick and choose the right tool sets that they need, right? So that it's almost an ecosystem. They're lowering the barrier of entry for developers into a very well-flexed kind of ecosystem. So that was number one thing that got me very excited. Number two, not only is it the technology tool sets that they're working with, they're working with the private and government entities as well, right? I
Yes.
think that's key. The fact that you've got the business, quotes, the business side players that they're educating with and bringing to this kind of library and tool sets to use is going to be what takes the blockchain forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I read on Twitter yesterday or the day before some suggestions that there's some big things coming for Morpheus Labs with regard to government announcements or just collaborations in terms of pro-blockchain, collaboration. And so in that sense, you also, and certainly knowing the space in Singapore, do you feel that where you're situated is also fundamental, given that Singapore is very progressive, for example, certain other regions of the globe are as well? Does geography matter?
Geography definitely matters, and you'll see that it's almost like the emerging countries are kind of pushing ahead, right? And they're doing that for two reasons. Number one, the smaller emerging countries, they almost have a smaller ecosystem. You have a controlled environment that you can experiment on. In the US, it's a huge 50 plus state system. How are you going to coordinate across all the different state level laws, federal level laws and all the population? That's a lot of moving pieces that you have to kind of coordinate. So it's the smaller moving states where you have a controlled environment. And it's also the emerging countries because they're not tied down by legacy infrastructure and regulations, right? They're kind of moving from a state of, some of them haven't even joined the financial economy really, like let's say some regions in the sub-Saharan area, right? They're just going to leapfrog all the legacy banking that we're dealing with right now here in the States and go not just to credit, they're going to go straight into cryptocurrencies, right? So that's a very exciting time that they can move forward. So geography matters in the sense of these are the emerging countries, right?
Right, okay. And obviously it's interesting too, because not a lot of people discuss just how advanced some of these developing regions are with their use of mobile phones, for example, when it comes to finance. In fact, many of these regions are more progressive than some of the developed nations in terms of experimenting with interesting assets, even pre-blockchain. So they're certainly well positioned and well poised to move into this arena. And again, it's more palatable perhaps in those regions where it's fundamental to be able to hedge against, currency crises, for example, where it's, an expectation that tomorrow, your currency may be just so overhyped or overinflated that and hyperinflated that it just loses its value. So it's really interesting points that you're making there. Now, to move back to Morpheus Labs for a moment, I wanted to talk to you a bit more about how this is going to play out. Why a BPaaS melding with a finance protocol like yours, and what's the benefit, and how do you really collaborate to consolidate both your values as you move forward with your own agenda?
So Morpheus Lab is an amplifier. I've used it as an amplifier of what I've been trying to do, or what Fusion has been trying to do, right? As an example, I go out, I talk to various different partners, say, join our ecosystem. I've got 2 or 3 different issuance platforms joining up. I've got 2 or 3 different asset originators. I've got 3 or 4 different identity providers, right? They're all coming over and building on this full stack. Now, just imagine that being done 10 times over, because that's really what Morpheus Lab is doing, right? They're reaching out to each individual project, collaborative real projects like Fusion, like VeChain, but some of the other names that you have there, and they're pulling it all together into one platform now, right? So that's why I view them as a huge amplifier about what I've been trying to do.
Sure.
The fact that they have boots on the ground, well, if I can just add this one thing, the fact that they have boots on the ground in Singapore and Malaysia, in some of these developing countries that we were just talking about who are blockchain friendly, makes it even that much more powerful.
Right, and given that they are that full stack design, let's be real about that, they've developed the software to provide the tool suite. How does that work with you, given that you're a protocol itself? How are you going to integrate, and how are they going to essentially support you? That's what I want to try and find out, is how are you going to optimize your outcomes by this partnership?
Right. Not to just, of course, running the nodes and whatnot, that's a given. That's just like, okay, take away the work of having to set up nodes from the developer side. Build sample applications with the tools that we have, like put it into bite-sized cookies. So you want to issue an asset, here's a library that you want to do. You want to actually go and time slice this asset, here it is again, right? Not only will you have this tool, these sample tools that Morpheus will be building with Fusion, right? This is a very exciting thing, right? It's not Fusion just going on and building. Like Morpheus's developers will be building using Fusion's tools to kind of get these sample apps out there. But as Morpheus's type of developers get more familiar with what Fusion is doing, they're also familiar with what all the other projects that are on Morpheus are doing. And that's where the kind of the organic melding of technologies actually happen. Because it's just like, for me, I'm fluent in 3 languages, sadly, just 3, but I can easily switch between those 3 languages because I know them well, right? Now just imagine it's the same with the technology. Okay, you know what, for the interoperability side, here's a great solution that Fusion's got. So let me put that in here. But maybe for something else where I got to do some kind of chain, Oracle or something like that, let me bring over something from chain analysis side. And, maybe there's some kind of high transaction that needs to be run through. Well, let's bring over something from Neo side. And there's just some really exciting thing because they're just treating these as like different languages they can access. Right?
Gotcha.
That's the type of organic
makes a lot of sense
that I'm looking forward to.
Sure. And what about with regard to the proof of applications being built? I mean, how robust is it now, or how is it building in terms of that proof of development?
Can you rephrase that question?
Well, just in the sense of, just in terms of the stages you're at now. So perhaps I wasn't clear. Just, given that you're a protocol, but also you want to make sure that you're building a more replete ecosystem for yourselves as Fusion. Where's the evidence empirically about the stages of your development there, moving beyond just a protocol and more into the DeFi application side?
Yeah, so our quantum swap has actually been live. The quantum swap is just a native version, a really fast version of the atomic swap, right? You can swap. We've got various different ERC20 Ethereum tokens that are already on the Fusion network, but that's been live and working without issues, since the launch of mainnet. I mean, there have been advancements to it, such as like trying to do swaps on a private level, and certainly the community has found bugs, and we fixed those. So that's the benefit of taking our time and running all these transactions. We have over 600, now it's over 700,000 different transactions now that have been swapped through. So it's a robust network that we have, right? The application layer, where we've been working on the wallet side, that's an application, so there are always going to be bugs to work through on the application, but none of it has been down at the protocol level, which is a very exciting thing, right? So, the application might be, hey, I just tried to slice up a time lock for you, and for some reason it's not showing up in the right place in my wallet, right? So we look back and say, oh, it's because maybe the UI needed to be adjusted slightly. We needed to change the button slightly, but we didn't have to go and actually come redo the protocol. So I'm quite comfortable with it.
Well, that's good to know. And thank you for explaining that, because obviously we want to see that development happen. Now, proof of stake, it's controversial to some experts in the industry, whether they come from the cryptography camp, or whether they come from blockchain. There's some conjecture right now, quite serious ones, about the legitimacy or the viability of proof of stake in comparison to proof of work, for example. What are your thoughts on this, given you are pro proof of stake, you're built around this idea, especially that unique design of the ticket proof of stake? How's everything going with that? Are you glad you made that choice? And is it providing the necessary security for your ecosystem?
Yeah. I'll answer the questions in reverse. Right. So I am very glad with our proof of stake. The ticket proof of stake that takes advantage of the time value is working great. There's not been any issuance where it's like somebody's nodes lost all their tickets inappropriately. Right. They've been punished, for example, in case their node went down. And there's always discussion on whether the punishment is too severe or not. We're obviously pretty flexible on that front. But reason why I like the ticket of proof of stake that Fusion has is because we don't actually risk the entire token when you actually stake with us. You remember the time value that I talked about earlier? What we do is we only slice the time that we need for you to stake, and you still keep the full token. So let's say the worst situation happens. You join a staking pool, and you're kind of staking with them for let's say 3 months. And they're an illegitimate staking pool. They do some kind of crazy exit scam. In case of other tokens, guess what, man? You're out of luck because they just took your tokens and ran away. With the Fusion ticket proof of stake, all they've done is they've taken that exposure for the 3 months time. But you as an owner, you still have the full token. So in 3 months times, you got the full token back in your hands, right? So that's why I'm quite happy with the ticket of proof of stake system.
So it's almost a built-in insurance system.
Yeah, I like to think of it as kind of, if I'm using it for X time, then I should risk X time. I shouldn't risk anything greater than that.
Right.
I risk for what I get paid for. Now, as far as the different consensus protocols, every time I wake up, there's like a new proof of something out there that I haven't heard of before. And I can't, I'm not advanced enough to predict which consensus is going to win out, which is why I think a collaborative approach is quite important here, and why we're always thinking of different ways of layering out our technology as well, so that we can work with other type of consensus mechanisms. Like, for example, even other type of distributed ledgers for that matter. We've seen announcements with the likes of Phantom, right? And they're a DAG, right? And just completely different type of approach than just a traditional blockchain, for example. I mean, we just want to continue to layer in and say, here's the Fusion technology. How can we best work with all the various other consensus, other blockchain protocols that are out there?
And it's really interesting you say that, because essentially most blockchains are built on the fundamental sort of premise of the DAG anyway. But then you look at the private versions to the public, you look at being a proof of authority, proof of work, proof of stake, and there's new ones coming out, proof of history. I was just talking to Geek yesterday actually about this. So the point I think you make that's important is you have that flexibility in mind of the different value propositions that various consensus mechanisms can bring. And certainly there's also pros and cons, to each of them potentially. But really, we just don't know. I think it's fair to say what's going to play out in the future. But as someone who's pro interoperability, surely that puts you in a good position and in good stead for the future as you build out, in this DeFi arena.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That's the hope,
Yeah. Okay. Now, mainnet updates, you already alluded to some of them. That was the next point I want to talk about. How challenging has it been to now have this native token sort of evolve, in the crypto stage?
I think the transition to from like ERC to mainnet was completely smooth. I mean, it went live. There were lots of comments from the community that said this is the smoothest transition from testnet to mainnet that they've ever been part of. And then it's like people just go to an address, they swap the ERC20, and then they now hold mainnet tokens. Now, of course, there's confusion out there like anything. Well, we've got the ERC20 tokens, you've got the mainnet tokens, and we're definitely looking to sunset all the ERC20 tokens that are out there. It's just a matter of kind of getting all these onto this new mainnet protocol. Mainnet token, sorry.
Now, I wanted to ask you in that context, because we hear about this sort of rumor out in the crypto domain that it's more challenging once you have your native tokens to have the exchanges, work with you because of the additional requisites, that many exchanges then face. Have you found that from your experience, that there's lesser of an interest once you move into a native scenario?
Luckily, no. Luckily not yet, but definitely each exchange has their own roadmap and priority to switch from ERC20 to the mainnets, right? That's what you're beholden to, and that's what we're seeing in the industry right now. So far, no exchange has gone out and said, okay, you know what, you got a mainnet token, we don't want to talk to you. I mean, that's maybe one of the reasons as well that we've got such you look at on CoinMarketCap, we're pretty much listed on all the major exchanges anyway already, because we're a pretty strong project, right? So we've taken care of making sure that people can access the Fusion tokens when they need to, and then we switch over to our mainnet.
Got it. And how important has it been to have that liquidity base as well? As you mentioned, you have some of the big names already, with regard to exchange support. What does it mean to be out there in an ecosystem where we're looking at a potential sort of bearish market? We're not really sure where things are going, but you now have the support already of these exchanges and it's relatively liquid.
Yeah. For me, I look at the liquidity more from when I think about the enterprise type of relationships, right? If you're an enterprise firm and then you look at let's say you can solve the answer of how can I get exposure to tokens, right? I know how to deal with the token. Then you're left with, all right, am I able to get the necessary tokens and also get out of the tokens in a suitable amount of time? If an enterprise organization comes and they say, this thing's trading at 5,000, 5,000 tokens a day, of course they're going to have to shy away because they're going to move the entire market. But when they see healthy volumes, maybe it's 2 million, maybe it's 3 million, I don't know what the proper number is going to be, but that's the comfort level I think we need to give enterprise to engage with the likes of a Fusion.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, in terms of the API data sets, the libraries you're building, that's ongoing, no doubt. There's transparency there. Are you comfortable with the pace of the development in terms of code, in terms of repos, in terms of contributions from the community?
we'd always like it to be faster, right? It's as a product person, I like the kind of story where it's like the business always tells the product person you're not moving fast enough, and the product person always tells the developer you're not moving fast enough. Like that's the reality of the cycle where we at. But that also takes back to why we're kind of partnering with the Morpheus and also pushing ahead with our development campaign, because we know that if we just keep relying on the developers that are within Fusion, I mean, they're good developers, but there's only so many of them versus the network of developers and the ecosystem that we have. Now we've got hundreds and hundreds of people that can help Fusion innovate.
Right. So in the context of if one of the challenge of the barriers to entry is the regulator, are you doing anything in your role or anyone in the team to try and facilitate or smooth over the process for those parties who perhaps just need education, better understanding, better communication with people like you, so that once again we can expedite the process of regulation?
Yeah, I'm not actually talking to any of the regulators now. I leave that to the big guys with their agencies and alliances who are actually meeting with them, right? So they're I don't know, laying out the road for us in the time being.
Okay. Well, it's good to know, because when I was speaking with Gilbert Verdian from Quant, he's actually directly involved in that kind of, a sort of privileged community of decision makers. He's one of the reps for blockchain, actually. So it's just interesting to see how there are players in the blockchain sort of startup game also trying to interact at that level to try and facilitate and expedite the process and educate as well. It's so important. Now, with regard to some of the claims, I've just written down one that I've read from your website and literature. It was an interesting quote about saying that you are a distributed control rights management system, and that you are cutting edge right now. Do you still stand by that idea that you lead out cutting edge technology?
Yeah, for the distributed control rights, I still stand by that idea. So let me explain a little bit. The interoperability, of course, there are very good solutions out there between Cosmos and Polkadot. But, they've got between validators and passing data back and forth. I think it's a good approach, right? But with the Fusion, what it's actually doing is it's operating on interoperability at digital asset level. And what's even more important, it's not like some atomic swap, which is also a very good solution. The concept behind DCRM is you're giving the custody of this asset to a blockchain, right? The custody of the asset to a blockchain. You're not giving it to an entity, you're giving it to the nodes that are on the blockchain. That's why we call it decentralized custody solution. And because of that, right, you don't have to impose any different type of coding standards on the external blockchains. You don't have to trust your assets to someone who might disappear, right? We create interoperability with this concept of decentralized custody and no compatibility standards. Okay. So that's why I think it's cutting edge.
Okay, now that's essentially distributed custody as well when it comes to the nodes. So are there any inherent risks, given that there are certain pros to having a relatively centralized custodial system for a decentralized technological innovation that we're seeing in a movement? Do you know what I mean? Is there any risk inherent in having this approach?
That is exactly why we're taking our time, right, with a DCRM. I mean, we've got DCRM.network, which is our DCRM 4.0 alpha. It's already live for you to use right now. But why haven't we merged everything else with the mainnet? Primarily, it is around figuring out what is the right balance between resilience of the keys itself. You don't obviously want a decentralized type of a sharded key where two nodes disappear and all of a sudden you can't recover your assets, right? That's one of the risks. But you also don't want it so concentrated where people can just hack out of your system and say, okay, I've taken control of 30% of your nodes, and now I can back out all these decentralized.
Yes, that would not be a good look. So once again, you've just got to make sure that you tweak this until it's right.
Yes, and then we're taking our time. We're reaching out to partners to join us, especially as going to Q4 to help us, stress test the system.
Well, it's interesting. Now, with regard to the biz development, you've really focused on trying to expand this. You have Justin Sun, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, and also you have Hassan Khan as more members contribute to the business side. What are they doing specifically in these regions they represent?
Okay, Hassan actually is our tech lead over here, a director of engineering. So he's working with us on the engineering side in the US. And he joined for us from Atomic, which, I'm really happy he's been with us. He's made a lot of improvements on the Asset Gateway, which is our centralized solution for interoperability right now. And Justin is in the European zone, and he's doing what I'm doing as well. He reaches out to the traditional banking, some of the new digital banks, such the new digital banks that have come on in Switzerland, let's say, right, and establish relationships with them. He's like the biz dev guy over.
Okay, I would love to talk to him further, especially since you and I have opened the door of regulation and the imperatives of that later. But it's good to hear that you're expanding, your team. I think that many people who want to hear about the progress of Fusion or any startup need to see evidence of expansion in that area. Now, here's a tough question, and no one likes to talk about it, but the token. Let's go there. Now, the FSN token, the first thing I want to ask is, why do you need it? Why essentially do you need to have a token to run a very strong and replete ecosystem for Fusion?
Well, someone's taking the risk of storing. You're running a server, so you got to pay somebody. Like in the traditional sense, right? This is the argument. I would pay this money to maybe Amazon or something. I pay them $2,000 a month to run servers for me and keep all this data. All right. Well, now I'm no longer doing that. I'm giving it to the blockchain network to do. So how did people who are running this blockchain network get compensated? Well, let's use the Fusion as a gas for that, right? So that's kind of like the primary way that I think about it as a utility token.
Okay, so micropayments, are a fundamental feature or component of utility tokens at the moment, the way we deem them valuable. So where does it fit when we come back to that terminological anomaly of money or currency and utility?
The beauty with our interoperable platform is I'm not tying you to use Fusion as the payment token. It's the gas that pays the service. It's the gas that powers the blockchain network. But because we can bring in any coin into our system, you can use anything for payments. Right? If you want to use stable coins, that's totally fine. Why should you have to issue a Fusion bond when you can issue, let's say, a USD bond that's wrapped within the Fusion protocol, which can then interact and be paid out with ETH or Bitcoin?
Sure, and it makes perfect sense. But if we go back to some of those points you made before about incentivization, for example, once you cross over from gas into incentivization, there's also implications of, once again, rewards, for work done. So in that context, how do we explain that when it comes to utility?
Well, when you have to, let me think about the right way to say this. The ecosystem has to evolve, right? As the ecosystem gets stronger, then the entire as the platform evolves, the entire ecosystem gets stronger. That's the right way. If I'm introducing more tools, then anybody who's building with it, they all stand to benefit. So it naturally makes sense. Like a Fusion happens to be the utility that you're actually improving the utility of this network for. So that's what we're going to, reward you for, because you're improving the usability of the entire network.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what it seems to be happening, is that we're literally trying to redefine, an asset class, and perhaps utility and, other asset classes or classifications will change in the future so that it does encompass a little bit more of some of those things that you're suggesting. Now, one of the things I wanted to go over, some of this tough stuff, is the price, roughly about 25 cents, as I understand, USD. Market cap, around about 8.3 mil at the moment. Supply around 35 mil. Circulating supply. Total supply of 57.3. Now, I raise those points because your all-time high was over $9. There's a vast difference between 25 cents and $9. So I just want to open this up and let you take the floor and address, if I take the Aussie sort of phrase, why the bloody hell was the difference so great between $9 all-time high and now?
Yeah. Well, I wish we all knew what the market conditions were, but there's some fairly obvious things that we can address and get out of the way. When it was at $9, just do a kind of correlation analysis with what the general altcoins were doing and what ETH was doing, right? That's when ETH was at, close to $1,000 or so, right? There was a nice little move. Then the entire altcoin market got hit. I mean, if we went to the bear market, I would argue that the altcoins are definitely still in a kind of bear market situation right now. There's just only so many funds that are sloshing around in the cryptocurrency, despite all this talk about how, the digital currencies are being accepted, and they are. But from an investment standpoint, it's still a very small pool that's kind of controlling the tokens, right? There's not huge like billions of dollars of money coming in.
Yep.
So in that sense, of course, people are kind of reallocating their risk. They see the general altcoin market hurt, so they kind of hedge themselves and they go to the major coins. This is just like a standard trading situation. When the stock market sells off, let's say the S&P 500 sells off, what do I go to? I go to the major names. I go to maybe a trusted name of, back then I would have said General Motors, but I can't say that anymore. Maybe it's going to be like a Google or something like that.
Right.
But there's some mainstay names that people gravitate towards in all the kind of small capsule software.
Sure. But just to go back to this to help us better understand, and perhaps those who aren't privy to some of the, to understand the back end inner workings of the way in which sometimes crypto plays out before you even move to list. What does tend to happen is you see VCs trying to invest, in the pre-sales and the private sales. As you know, that was a very common play and still is to some degree. And many of them, their core focus is to offload those tokens at some point for profit. Yeah. So, and we've seen that play out across the board, and that explains often why there's such major declines in value of digital assets. Now, was that a problem, do you think, for Fusion in comparison to others, especially when we're talking about a really serious difference between $9 plus and the current value now?
Yeah. Actually, if you take a look at the wallets and the major, if you wanted to call them whales, but the major people who've got participated within the original ICO, they haven't actually moved out. They're still big believers in the project. I wasn't here when the ICO was done, but we still talk to a lot of the original believers of our project, right? And of course, everyone is not happy with the performance of the token. We don't feel that it reflects the value of the project. But they're still believers of what DJ and Fusion and the team are building here, right? So It's almost like it's a matter of, it's a waiting game. It's a matter of us proving it. But we just got to keep our eyes focused, continue to build out the adoption and the technology. And I just know the token price will reflect the value of the network that we're bringing.
Sure. And what would you say to those that obviously not everyone's as altruistic or as future driven as perhaps some of those VCs did invest? What would you say to those parties that did invest in you from the beginning, but really did that only to essentially sell off into fiat at some point and then move into other assets? It was really just a move to gain capital and utilize you as a mechanism to do so. Obviously that, does affect the trust from the people, from the crypto community in these projects, because we just see that. So is it an issue, and what would you say to those parties?
The market is what the market is going to be, right? You're going to have people who are speculators and people who are believers in the project. Now, I don't fault anyone for taking position that they have, right? That's not my position to judge anyone. I don't have anything negative or positive to say to the speculators. They're just a force in the market. I would just like to do an analogy, and I know this analogy is a bit dangerous because it is a utility comparison to a security, and but I'm just drawing on my background. Is it the fault of a speculator when they go and buy a bunch of, let's say, put options or a bunch of call options within Google or Facebook, and they drive the price up or down? Not really. They're just a force in the market, right? Of course, if you're a long-term holder of Facebook, and then let's say it goes down 20% because someone's been leveraging up on puts, you're not going to be happy with the effect on your price. But again, the market has a way of sorting itself out.
Right. And until it does so, the interesting point is that because it's such a small market, and really comparatively to the bigger markets you've worked in before, this is very, very small. There's certainly room for manipulation in this space. It's very easy to manipulate, often very liquid startups, particularly. We've seen that play out in the past and even now. So given those concerns, surely it does have a bit of an effect on you when we go and look at, for example, the performance of your token and really see such concerning declines over time. That really makes it tough to put confidence back into startups like you. Does it? So what do you do to combat that? I mean, do you just head down, bum up, and just keep working and be tech focused and be business focused, or what's the strategy for the team?
Yeah. Yes, the primary things is to be you got to be business focused. That's the best way you prove the utility of your token, of your network, right? It's kind of show me what you guys are actually doing. But as well, the belief of the community is very important. You know, DJ is often in the community itself answering the questions. And they're, you know, when the token price is where it is, nobody's very happy, right?
No.
But we're not kind of disappearing or anything like that. We're in the community trying to answer questions as much as we can, but also know that we have to balance the time. Like if we're in there in the community answering questions all the time, then we're not pushing ahead in business or partnerships or technology where we should be. So we always have to, you know, this is just to reach out to the community. When we don't answer, it's not because we don't want to, it's just because we literally have to take care of some other stuff. Right,
and I totally understand that and appreciate it. Now, with lockups, I want to talk about that in terms of protecting, you know, the incoming consumer, you know, the incoming participant in the ecosystem. Say they want to purchase the utility token for whatever reason. Have you made sure with the structures that were in place or prior to you that those parties that invested initially have long-term lockups, or has that now been exhausted? If a VC wanted to, could they technically just offload now?
Unfortunately, I'm not privy to the lockup periods that were present in place, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't answer that question.
Okay, I'll have to check that one. But, you know, obviously it's a concern more as a general thing across the board. One of the things with your roadmap, I wanted to ask you about plans for things like virtual machine, expansion of the asset gateway. What's the plan for the next, say, 3 or 4 months as you really start to build out your asset?
Well, the asset gateway is, as I mentioned, it's the centralized option, right? Because we like to give tools for every person needs a tool for what they want to actually get done. You know, DCRM is great from a decentralized standpoint. Maybe as a private organization or custody, you prefer a centralized solution. We leave it up to you. The asset gateway, we've already been able to lock in the ETH and the ERC20 coins, as I mentioned. Next thing we want to do is actually lock in some Bitcoin. And then there are other major coins that we want to add on to it. Maybe it's EOS, maybe it's Stellar. Like, just throwing some coins out there for consideration. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying expanding the asset gateway. We're also working with actual custodians to adopt the asset gateway so that, you know, the problem with the centralized solution is, well, there's a central risk associated with it. And Fusion, we're not a custodian. So we want custodians to actually take that asset gateway and manage the risk on the user's behalf. Mm-hmm. Okay. The different virtual machine updates is all about having the smart contract recognize not just the Fusion tokens, the Fusion wrap tokens, but also the concept of time locks and time values with those tokens, right? So now I can have smart contracts that trigger a 3-month time lock of a certain token. And that's going to be a really exciting type of change when that will be introducing to the industry.
Absolutely. Now, with regard to big names, obviously you can't say them probably because of NDAs, but what, in terms of partnership pipelines, what's there? You know, what can you hint to us to give us confidence that there's been partnerships prepared for the coming months?
Yeah, I can say that the partnerships that I'm talking to now are actually more technology focused. I think this reflects the fact that we're doing an adoption push on the technology front, and you should be seeing a few names come to light in the next couple of months. Some of them are actually interesting in the fact that they make our decks more powerful. I mean, I'm very excited by some of the discussions I'm having. But as you're saying, I can't share the exact names yet.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned for those. Now, PR, another really tough question. Perhaps you won't like some of this, but I looked into sort of your PR strategies in the past, and certainly influencers were engaged, and there were other methods with regard to trying to get the information out. What are your thoughts on the way that more generally influencers, for example, or media in crypto, some of those articles we see from the well-respected names like Forbes, we now see a crypto element of that. What are your thoughts on the way in which, firstly, Fusion has gone about promoting their startup, and then the more general macro comment about the approach that startups tend to take?
We're a big believer of earned media as much as we can, right? So we put substantive news out there, and this is like a very traditional approach. We generate interesting substantive news and wait for people to proactively reach back out to us. And that worked very well in the case of AXP, worked very well in the case of Yod, for example, because people were actually interested in this type of build out. Of course, there are situations where other projects have huge marketing budgets and they kind of plow their way to get their awareness up. We're always looking at the right balance between earned media, and every now and then it does make sense to have a sponsor type of media so that people are aware of actually what we're doing. When we talk about subjects like interoperability, for example, to most of the crypto community, it's still a very gray concept. It's not very tangible, right? It's very easy when I can say, all right, someone's just built, some kind of payment gateway that's come in and they're actually showing up. They're swiping a credit card or something. That's something people can see and touch, and the press will react very well to that. When I say it's interoperability, it's more like a protocol layer type of, it's like a protocol, right? It's a technology type of situation. So how do I get people excited about that? In that case, we're thinking maybe some kind of explainer video or something from a professional that's from one of these big sites could be very helpful.
Right. Well, once again, thank you for being transparent about the different ways that your team approach, media. What was interesting when I did the research, just looking into various representatives in the crypto space, we saw the likes of Chico Crypto, of Lark, Crypto Lark as well. They've been engaged previously, both done sponsored content. Chico Crypto does disclose very clearly, what money does transact between he and you. So, in that sense, it's very transparent and clear. But do you think that more generally, there's an issue with the way in which some influencers, I'm not suggesting those two, perhaps take a more populist position and maybe don't necessarily understand all of the fundamentals to articulate exactly what the value is?
Yes, there definitely is a problem, and I would say it's not limited towards blockchain. It's only enhanced in blockchain because it's such a new technology. It's a complicated type of concept that not many people get, right? So when we think about this whole idea of influencers, it's still a very young concept. How often has influencers really come to play? It used to be that I would look onto the channel and it would be Michelle Pfeiffer's using X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to go and use that's the type of influencers that I grew up with. But with the with technology, with YouTube, etc., this whole personality of influencers being able to drive business, and then by business I mean maybe it's product placement, maybe whatever it's going to be, right? Brand awareness is really taken off in the last, I would just say, 2 to 3 years.
Right, and it must be hard also to do the due diligence to try and assess, those who are there for the long term or those who are just simply there to sort of take from the ecosystem and essentially get rich. Do you go through a process yourselves trying to look at those that are genuinely there for education, there for informing the public properly?
Yeah, as much as we can. We do our background check. We get a lot of incoming mail from people saying, hey, I see you here, we can raise your awareness by X, Y, and Z. We charge whatever it is, right? And we don't engage with them. Our engagement rate of a return on is actually something in a low 10%-ish to actually talk to somebody. And usually this also comes, whether it's Chico Crypto, for example, or yourselves, for example, it comes through reference checks, right? Other projects say you should talk to this person.
I see.
Right? They know what they're talking about.
Well, that's really good to know, because you would certainly know this in your position in the ICO craze, and then subsequently even now, some of the more prominent popular influencers, let's say, without trying to disparage anyone, their fees are immense. And because of that, becomes a bit of a deterrent more generally for people like you, to try and clean the system up and say, look, it's fine to have a great, philosophy for education, but don't charge us such ridiculous amounts.
Correct. And I agree with you 100%. A lot of the industry, I would say you're going to have the people who are like, I don't know, the Hollywood stars or something like that. Are they overcharging? Maybe, maybe not. You definitely we're both aware that some definitely are overcharging. But as a whole, the industry themselves have also kind of re-benchmarked themselves. A lot of the legitimate influencers have talked down their own price because they're aware that the industry isn't what it used to be.
Right, and that's a good thing, because once again we start to move more to acceptance of value in the real world. Now, your team, you talked about developments there. I wanted to talk a bit more about your CEO. Actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Is it Dijun?
You can just call him DJ.
DJ, okay.
The music DJ.
Okay. Now, he apparently was heavily involved and created Qtum and VeChain, or was part of that core team. Now, should that be something is a boon for you, given his experience, or is it something that is more of a challenge because, obviously each of those startups have their own pros and cons and their own challenges?
For me, it's a boon because I mean he's clearly shown cases where not only does he know the technology itself, but he's helped those organizations launch into very successful projects. Now, obviously, when DJ was involved with the likes of the VChains and the Qdoms, it was before my time. It was actually before my time of even being involved in the blockchain industry. But I certainly know his lineage, and it was very helpful in validating that DJ is not just another person who's like, hey, where's my Lambo? I'm just selling
Right.
a white paper with nothing behind it. He's actually got the technology. He's built some technology platforms before.
Right, and I did check with that he does have the academic credentials as well. He has a degree in computer science, so that was important that he has that ability behind him.
Yeah,
that knowledge.
Yeah,
So,
I view it net as a positive.
Okay, so how's it been working with him in terms of evidence of leadership, successful drive of the whole ecosystem in all of its different verticals?
Yeah, he's definitely got the vision, right? He's got the Internet of Value and the DeFi vision that helps me orientate myself a lot of times, because I'll say, no matter what I do, I come from a traditional finance background. I also come from a traditional product background. It's like, yes, John, some of your constraints are very valid right now, but don't worry about it because this is where I see that we should be going towards to, right? That's the type of leadership, almost like a distortion field that you need around yourself to a certain degree, right? I mean, you don't want to be completely out of touch with reality. And I think he walks a good balance between, I got to drive this organization despite all the chaos that's happening right now. I got to drive it to that end destination.
It's really interesting you say that. He's the iconic sort of optimist of the space, the real true blockchain believer. But then in your team, you also have a member, a code reviewer that's well known, Andre Cronje. He's the head of innovation and technology. Now, he's been quoted several times. He's one of the very candid speakers of the space, saying that 99% of the space is shit and 99% of the space is, going to die. So, you have that interesting sort of interplay between your CEO and that kind of vision or that perspective. How do you put yourself in the 1%? How do you, move away from being part of the high risk group?
With the exact approach of trying to keep Andre and his frankness with us, right? Because, he's going to call out our project on whether we're walking the right path or the wrong path. And it's a tension that has to happen. Right, just like in any organization, there's a visionary and there's a practical person who's going to take care of business, making sure that you're not spouting a bunch of fluff. Right,
yeah.
And
that's certainly Andre. He doesn't pull any punches, and he certainly no.
Yeah, and he's honest about when he thinks he can really help out with a project, and when he's like, okay, guys, you guys go fix this stuff first, and then I'll come back in when the time is ready. Right? And I really always appreciate his open dialogue. It's always more helpful to be transparent and truthful.
Exactly. Now, with regard to the number of engineers that you have, number of internal devs, I couldn't work out exactly what the number is, or I couldn't assess the size of that component of your team. Do you feel you've got the right number, and can you just update us on the engineers in your team?
Sure. With the engineering team is always in flux, right? Especially as we're I like to say, restructuring the organization to be we go from launching the mainnet to now we're going into this kind of adoption with this new technology, right? So the team always needs to be tighter and kind of bringing new resources into the mix. That's why you saw the likes of Hassan join us, and there's going to be more people that we're kind of looking to hire. Now, as far as the protocol team, I'll give you ranges, right? Because that's always helpful. It's going to be 15 to 20 developers that we have in China who are actually working on the protocol. It comes and goes just like any startup. As the build up really accelerates, we're going to be hiring more people.
Okay.
So it pushes to the top of that. In the US, we have US and Europe, we have 3 engineers right now. And that's also comes and goes. I've had at the highs, we had like 5 or 6 developers kind of working on the projects. And right now we're taking there's almost like a lull here as we're kind of resharpening, refocusing the team on this new adoption era. So that's why we're at 3.
Got it. So obviously, the pressures of the more macro financial status of crypto is another reason why there'd be that flux in the number of employees or the number of people in your team. But what are you doing to sustain your team long term, beyond reliance on tokens? Because obviously there's finite amounts of that in every startup pretty much. How do you create revenue?
Well, yes. So to answer that question, number one is how are we doing? What are we doing to kind of make sure that there's longevity in our team? Well, you have to manage your burn rate just like any startup, right? That's why you have to be very lean with your resources, grow when you need to, and kind of play it and cut down when you need to as well. How are we looking to grow our revenue? Well, that goes with the project offerings that we have, coming out. So some of them I cannot say, but some of the licenses that we've already announced, like a licensing structure, use our technology for X number of tokens. That's a very easy way to monetize the value that we have, that we bring to people.
I see. And is that successful yet? Is that starting to be actualized?
It's, to be frank, this goes to what I said earlier. Enterprises still need to figure out exactly how they deal with tokens. And there have been some people who have signed up for the program. We've announced those. You'll see that they're mostly technology firms because they know how to handle tokens. But where we really start getting the type of that revenue growth that we're looking for is the more traditional commercial entities of, like, maybe it's going to be that hedge fund next door or something like that, but they need to figure out what to do with a token, right? So we have to insert a layer to do this transaction where it's like, here's your fiat, so just treat it as a traditional license, pay as a traditional cash, and we'll just take care of all the token time locks on the back end of that for you.
Right. Clearly, from what we've been talking about too, we just need that regulatory push, some sort of light bulb moment for them to have that domino effect, so that then I think we can start to see really exciting times emerge for the business potential. Now, I want to move across to something really tough to talk about, and that is the hack. That is the theft. Wanted to find out more about what exactly happened there, because when I went and researched, there were some suggestions it could have even been an inside job. $6.4 million was lost, and it wasn't that long ago. Can you just comment on what you can to address, quite sincerely, a serious issue from the community as you continue to build?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a serious issue, and it's always one of these setbacks where it's like, okay, great, people are aware of our project, so of course they go and attack the project because it's well known, right? And there are certain information, as you said, I can't share, but based on the trail of evidence that we've seen, it definitely had to be someone that had close access to the foundation, right? Because they were able to get access to private keys of cold wallets. So that makes it limits out, the certain types of entry points that you can have to kind of be able to do that type of theft with us. Now, we're still working with the police, so I can't share any more on exactly who the suspects are, but the investigations are ongoing.
Well, it must be really disconcerting at the very least, that it could be someone in your team. I mean, that's one of the challenges with this pseudonymous sort of system where, it's difficult to perhaps sometimes trace exactly who, but at the same time, clearly you are taking the right steps to do the best you can. But in terms of remediation, what are you doing as a startup to, consolidate the trust in your communities? Obviously we talk about trustless systems. When it comes to trust in startups, that's a little different. Given that this theft did happen, how can you reassure the community that you are doing things to remedy this?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you got to do is, this is almost kind of like a disaster recovery, the standard playbook, right? You got to show people what happened. That's number one. What are you doing to kind of mitigate the results, which we've been doing? We published some of the steps that we have, and it's too long, but involves hard forks and whatnot. And we still have to respect the wishes of the community and the whole concept of blockchain. So we took our time to actually choose the right path with the help of the community. But most importantly, as you said before, what are we doing to prevent it going forward, right? Because it's great to put a stop to this, but man, what if someone else steals the remaining 13 million tokens that are sitting in X, Y, and Z wallet?
Exactly. What if they're still there? What if this malact is still there?
Yeah, hopefully not. But there are steps that we've done as far as like distributing the risk of the wallet, so that no single wallet holds that much risk. I mean, there were some reasons that we had to kind of move the tokens in this particular case because we were activating all these different campaigns that I've mentioned, right? So not going to repeat that type of mistake again. And there are also things that we're examining where introducing even our own technology just makes a lot of sense, right? With the decentralized, the key sharding that we have and the time lock that we can insert on top of it, you'll see that in the dev the bounties that we're going to announce soon, it's going to be how can we enhance hot wallets and also add a protection on private keys, right, using the technology that we have.
Got it. So clearly you put in these significant strategies and sort of crypto plays to combat some of the issues that happen, even the PR disaster that it was.
Yeah, the most tangible steps when you think about it is distribute the risk and then work with custodians, right? I mean, I can't give you the bank that we're working with yet, but we're through, like, opening a bank account is always a very lengthy process, but we're working with traditional custodians to help further protect the assets that we have.
Got it. Now, in terms of staking, that is sort of a good segue, because I wanted to try and understand how your staking model is really going to affect the circulating supply. In terms of, once again, people are always looking for this concept of asset, not just necessarily, the potential of money. So in that sense, how does staking really make the token sexy for those who have that mindset of digital asset?
Well, the staking alone isn't going to be, to your point, that's not going to be the end driver of where the value of the network is going to be, right? Staking is just what we're using in the time being to encourage that we have a very robust set of participants, making sure that our network is pretty expansive. That's why we have 300 plus nodes across all over the world kind of powering these transactions, because the more participants you have in the system, the more battle tested it is. Right,
and hence more secure. But one of the side effects of that is it does affect your supply, and some people really focus on that. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, despite that that's not the reason for value?
Of course, when you have staking requires, there's an inflationary pressure that has to be combated. So that on the other side, there are two things that all blockchain projects are going to do. Number one, get assets and transactions onto the system, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this kind of development. What can we do to issue assets, and what type of other projects where I can run more transactions in our system, because that burns down, obviously, the supply, right? And the second part that we can do as well is the halvening, which this one I'll have to refer to DJ on his exact timing, but of course there is a whole halvening cycle that we're going to have where the returns on staking are just not going to be as lucrative as they are, or attractive as they are right now.
Okay, and that's obviously another reason, for those who are focused on the digital asset side, and even in the speculative realm, which is still a valid part of crypto, they'd be assessing these kinds of moves you're making to once again affect the supply, and thus, and also directly affect the security to make sure it is strong and distributed. So interesting times for you in that sense. One of the things I really did want to touch on before we finish off is another tough question about the risks of wash trading that are happening beyond your control. And we know they're happening in crypto more generally. So there are certain nefarious actors in the exchange domain or the exchange sector. I had a look at some of the lists. So I just wanted to touch on, for example, Hotbit, a very controversial exchange. I think we can all fairly state, almost moving towards $1 million of 24-hour volume there. And then we look at the likes of Binance, for example, significantly less, and rightly so perhaps. So then we move to IDEX or Huobi with almost no volume, when it comes to 24-hour trading. So that kind of vast distinction between Hotbit and the others is why I wanted to talk to you about inherent risks of wash trading. Is it an issue across the board?
There's a micro issue I want to address first, right? The reason why you're seeing the discrepancy between the likes of a Hotbit and a Huobi right now is because some of the exchanges, because of this theft that we've had, right, they're working with us, and we're limiting buys and withdrawals, and in essence limiting trades that are going to happen because we don't want the thief to be able to monetize their tokens. That's why you're seeing a drop on a lot of the major exchanges in the volume itself. Now, in the macro question that you asked, is wash trading an issue? Of course, it's it's an issue, and some of the exchanges are at 70% to 80% of their volume is going to be wash trading. The tough news that we're all recognizing is the regulators are coming after that, right? You're seeing headlines for wash trading being cracked down on. Let's just put it that way.
Well, that's good to hear. So in the long term, clearly, once they're removed from the equation, we can get more a better understanding of what true and authentic price values are. Because clearly, when there's wash trading there, we just really don't know what the genuine values are of each of these assets. But once again, I mean, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you, John. You've been more than forthright and certainly transparent in this conversation. And it's been more lengthy than we did anticipate. And I thank you once again for explaining these partnerships you're doing, explaining the value of your protocol, explaining that you are certainly trying to push forward in the DeFi sector, and also trying to enable interoperability when it comes to real viable business. So, mate, on behalf of all people, thank you for explaining that non-for-profit protocol. Thanks for explaining your revenue models, building on top of that with products. There's a lot going on for you. What would you like to say to us all as a final statement?
Well, first to the community, thank you for the continued faith in the project itself, especially through the tough times that we're having. And second, to just in general, like the interoperability solution that we talked about, decentralized, custody, and interoperability all in one is something I'm very excited. The Fusion team is very excited to bring to the market in Q4, right? And working with the likes of a Morpheus Lab is only going to enhance the awareness and adoption of the technology like that, and industry as a whole is going to benefit.
Absolutely. Well, mate, thank you once again for leading the way in these areas, and certainly it'd be great to catch up with you or other members of the team in the future. But until then, all the very best with Fusion, and keep building, keep going.
Thank you.